Hello, everyone. Got a few dirty jokes for you today.
So a teacher asks her class for some examples of medicines they know. Little Harry promptly raises his hands and says, Tylenol. For headaches. The teacher says, Very good, Harry. Anyone else? Little Jenny answers from the back, Ambien. My mom tells me it helps her sleep. The teacher smiles at her and says, Good job, Jenny. Then turns to her class and goes on. Listen here, children. Always be careful with medicines at home, okay? Now, does anyone else have another example? Little Johnny raises his hand slowly and says, Viagra. For diarrhea? The teacher freezes for a second before the rest of his statement hits her and she stammers out, For diarrhea? Little Johnny explains, Yeah, my mom keeps telling my dad to take it. It'll harden his shit up. So little Johnny was 7 years old and, like other boys his age, rather curious. He had been hearing quite a bit about making out from the older boys, and he wondered what it was and how it was done. One day he took his question to his mother, who became rather flustered. Instead of explaining things to Johnny, she told him to hide behind the curtains one night and watch his older sister and her boyfriend. This he did. The following morning, Johnny described everything to his mother. Sis and her boyfriend sat and talked for a while. Then he turned off most of the lights. Then he started kissing and hugging her. I figured sister must be getting sick because her face started looking funny. He must have thought so too, because he put his hand inside her blouse to feel her heart, just the way the doctor would. Except he's not as smart as the doctor because he seemed to have trouble finding her heart. I guess he was getting sick too, because pretty soon both of them started panting and getting all out of breath. His other hand must have been cold because he put it under her skirt. About this time, Sis got worse and began to moan and sigh and squirm around and slide down toward the end of the couch. This was when her fever started. I knew it was a fever because Sis told him she felt really hot. Finally, I found out what was making them so sick. A big eel had gotten inside his pants somehow. It just jumped out of his pants and stood there, about 10 inches long, honest. Anyway, he grabbed it in one hand to keep it from getting away. When Sis saw it, she got really scared, her eyes got big, and her mouth fell open, and she started calling out to God and stuff like that. She said it was the biggest one she's ever seen. I should tell her about the ones down at the lake by our house. Anyway, Sis got brave and tried to kill the eel by biting its head off. All of a sudden, she grabbed it with both hands and held it tight while he took a muzzle out of his pocket and slipped it over the eel's head to keep it from biting again. Sis lay back and spread her legs so she could get a scissor lock on it, and he helped by lying on top of the eel. The eel put up a hell of a fight. Sis started groaning and squealing, and her boyfriend almost upset the couch. I guess they wanted to kill the eel by squashing it between them. After a while, they both quit moving and gave a great sigh. Her boyfriend got up, and sure enough, they killed the eel. I knew because it just hung there, limp, and some of its insides were hanging out. My sister and her boyfriend were a little tired from the battle, but they went back to courting anyway. He started hugging and kissing her again. By golly, the eel wasn't dead. It jumped straight up and started to fight again. I guess eels are like cats. They have 9 lives or something. This time, Sis jumped up and tried to kill it by sitting on it. After about a 35-minute struggle, they finally killed the eel. I knew it was dead because I saw my sister's boyfriend peel its skin off and flush it down the toilet. So little, Johnny and his 2 friends are sitting on the front porch one day. The first one says, "My daddy is so cool he can eat 4 burgers at one meal." The second one says, "That's nothing. My daddy can eat 6. Little Johnny starts laughing and says, "My daddy can eat light bulbs." The other 2 boys tell Johnny that he is out of his mind. They ask him why he thinks his daddy can eat light bulbs. Little Johnny replies, "Last night I was passing my parents' room and my daddy said, 'Honey, turn out that light. I want to eat that thing.'" So a father came home from a long business trip to find his son riding a new 21-speed mountain bike. "Where did you get the money for the bike?" "It must have cost $300, he asked. "Easy, Dad," little Johnny replied. "I earned it hiking." "Come on, Johnny," the father said. "Tell me the truth." "That is the truth," Johnny replied. "Every night you were gone, Mom's boss, Mr. Reynolds, would come over to see Mom. He'd give me a $20 bill and tell me to take a hike." So little Johnny, age 7, came home from school one day and asked his dad, "Daddy, where do I come from?" His poor father started sweating, knowing that one day his son would want to know all about it. He looked around for his wife to take on the explanation, but she was out at the shops. It was no good, his father thought. It's time he knew, and took the young lad to one side and explained how Mummy and Daddy met and then married and wanted to produce a baby and, well, you know the rest. After much awkwardness and embarrassment, after nearly an hour, the dad finally reached the point in the story where his son was born in hospital. The young boy's face just stared back, mouth open and speechless. "So, tell me, son, why do you ask?" The boy, still in shock, said, "Billy Clark in our class said he was from Birmingham." So a preacher was making his rounds to his parishioners on a bicycle when he came upon little Johnny trying to sell a lawnmower. "How much do you want for the mower?" asked the preacher. "I just want enough money to go out and buy me a bicycle," said little Johnny. After a moment of consideration, the preacher asked, "Will you take my bike in trade for it?" Little Johnny said, "Mister, you've got yourself a deal." The preacher took the mower and tried to start it. He pulled and pulled on the rope until he was dripping with sweat, but the mower refuses to start. The preacher called little Johnny over and said, "I can't get this mower to start." Little Johnny said, "That's because you have to cuss at it to get it started." The preacher said, "I'm a man of the church and I can't cuss. It's been so long since I've been saved that I don't even remember how to cuss." Little Johnny looked at him happily and said, "Just keep pulling on that rope. It'll come back to you." So one sunny afternoon, little Johnny was sitting at the kitchen table working on his homework. He looked up, deep in thought, and decided to ask his dad something that had been on his mind. "Dad," he said curiously, "where did all of my intelligence come from?" His dad leaned back in his chair, smirked, and said, "Well, son, you must gotten it from your mother." "Because I'm pretty sure I still have all of mine." So the science teacher stood in the front of the class and said, "Children, if you could have one raw material in the world, what would it be?" Little Stevie raised his hand and said, "I would want gold, because gold is worth a lot of money, and I could buy a Corvette." The teacher nodded, and then she called on little Susie. Little Susie said, "I would want platinum because platinum is worth more than gold, and I could buy a Porsche." The teacher smiled, and then she called on little Johnny. Little Johnny stood up and said, "I would want silicone." The teacher said, "Silicone? Why, silicone, little Johnny, because my mom has 2 bags of the stuff, and you should see all the sports cars outside our damn house. So little, Johnny and his buddy, Billy, were hanging out behind the school, just goofing off like they always do. "Hey, Billy," Johnny said with a smirk. "I bet you're still a virgin." "Yeah, I was a virgin until last night," Billy shot back, sounding way too confident. Johnny raised an eyebrow. There was no way Billy was telling the truth. This was the same kid who once claimed he kissed a girl, but it turned out to be his cousin's cat. So Johnny just laughed and said as if. But Billy wasn't backing down. He leaned in a little closer, lowering his voice like he was about to share a secret that only the two of them would understand. "Yeah," Billy said, grinning. "Just ask your sister." Johnny rolled his eyes. "Nice try, Billy." "I don't have a sister." Billy leaned back, crossed his arms, and with the smuggest look ever, said, "You will in about 9 months. So one day, Grandma sent her grandson Little Johnny down to the waterhole to get some water for cooking dinner. As he was dipping the bucket in, he saw 2 big eyes looking back at him. He dropped the bucket and hightailed it for Grandma's kitchen. "Well now, where's my bucket and where's my water?" Grandma asked him. "I can't get any water from that waterhole, Grandma," exclaimed Johnny. "There's a big old alligator down there." "Now, don't you mind that old alligator, Johnny. He's been there for a few years now, and he's never hurt no one. Why, he's probably as scared of you as you are of him." "Well, Grandma," replied Johnny, "if he's as scared of me as I am of him, then that water ain't fit to drink." So a Sunday school teacher of preschoolers told her students that she wanted each of them to have learned one fact about Jesus by the next Sunday. The following week, she asked each child in turn what he or she had learned. Susie said, "He was born in a manger." Bobby said, "He threw the money changers out of the temple." Little Johnny said, "He has a red pickup truck, but he doesn't know how to drive it." "Curious," the teacher asked, "and where did you learn that, Johnny?" "From my daddy," said Johnny. "Yesterday, we were driving down the highway, and this red pickup truck pulled out in front of us, and Daddy yelled at him, 'Jesus Christ! Why don't you learn how to drive?'" So little Johnny walked into class with a black eye. The teacher was concerned and asked, "What's wrong?" "Our house is very small. Me, my mom, and my dad, we sleep on the same bed. Last night, my dad asked, 'Johnny, are you sleeping?' When I said no, he slapped my face and gave me a black eye." Teacher said, "The next time when your dad asks if you're sleeping, keep dead quiet and don't answer." The following morning, Johnny comes back with 2 black eyes. The teacher, by now very worried, asked, "My God, why have you now got 2 black eyes?" "I thought I told you to say nothing." Johnny replied, "Dad asked me again, 'Johnny, are you sleeping?' And I shut up and kept dead still. Then my dad and my mom started moving. At the same time, Mom was breathing all funny, kicking her legs up in the air and squealing like a hyena on the bed. Then my dad asked my mom, 'Are you coming?' Mom said, 'Yes, I'm coming. Are you coming too?' Dad answered, 'Yes.' They don't usually go anywhere without me, so I said, 'Wait for me. I'm coming too.'" So at Sunday school, the teacher explained how God created everything, including humans. Little Johnny listened intently when he heard that Eve was made from one of Adam's ribs. Later that week, Johnny's mom found him lying down, clutching his side. Concerned, she asked, "Johnny, what's wrong?" He groaned and said, I have a pain in my side. I think I'm going to have a wife. So the pretty teacher was concerned with one of her 11-year-old students. Taking him aside after class one day, she asked, "Little Johnny, why has your schoolwork been so poor lately?" "I'm in love," the boy replied. Holding back an urge to smile, she asked, "With whom?" "With you," he said. "But, Johnny," she said gently, "don't you see how silly that is? It's true that I would like a husband of my own someday, but I don't want a child." "Oh, don't worry," the boy said reassuringly. "I'll use a rubber." So the kids filed back into class Monday morning. They were very excited. Their weekend assignment had been to sell something, then share with the class how they were successful. Little Mary led off. "I sold lemonade and I made $30, she said proudly. My sales approach was how warm the day was and would they like some refreshment. "Very good," said the teacher. Little Sally was next. "I sold magazines," she said. "I made $45 and I explained to everyone that magazines would keep them abreast of current events." "Very good, Sally," said the teacher. Eventually, it was little Johnny's turn. The teacher held her breath. Little Johnny walked to the front of the classroom and dumped a box full of cash on the teacher's desk. $2,467, he said. $2,467, cried the teacher. "What in the world were you selling?" "Mouthwash," said little Johnny. "Mouthwash," echoed the teacher. "How could you possibly sell enough of that to make that much money?" "I found the busiest corner in town," said little Johnny. "I set up a chocolate chip cookie stand and gave everybody who walked by a free sample. They all said, 'This tastes like mud.' Then I replied, 'It is. Want to buy some mouthwash?'" So one morning, a teacher decided to make her English class a little more fun. She stood at the front of the room and said, "All right, class, today we're going to practice making sentences. Your word is beans. Who wants to go first?" A girl in the front raised her hand confidently and said, "My father grows beans in our garden." "Very good," the teacher replied with a smile. A boy in the back chimed in, "My father cooks beans for dinner." "Excellent," the teacher said, nodding. Then, little Johnny shot his hand up, a mischievous grin already forming. The teacher hesitated, but curiosity got the best of her. "All right, Johnny, let's hear your sentence." Johnny stood up proudly and declared, "We are all human beings." So the visiting church school supervisor asks little Johnny during Bible class who broke down the walls of Jericho. Little Johnny replies that he does not know, but it definitely is not him. The supervisor, taken aback by this lack of basic Bible knowledge, goes to the school principal and relates the whole incident. The principal replies that he knows little Johnny as well as his whole family very well and can vouch for them. If little Johnny said that he did not do it, he as principal is satisfied that it is the truth. Even more appalled, the inspector goes to the regional head of education and relates the whole story. After listening, he replies, "I cannot see why you are making such a big issue out of this. We will get 3 quotations and fix the darn wall." So little Johnny attended a horse auction with his father. He watched as his father moved from horse to horse, running his hands up and down the horse's legs, rump and chest. After a few minutes, Johnny asked, "Dad, why are you doing that?" His father replied, "Because I'm buying horses. I have to make sure that they are healthy and in good shape before I buy." Johnny looked worried. "Then I think we'd better hurry home right away." "Why?" said his father. "Because the delivery man stopped by yesterday. I think he wants to buy Mom." So little, Johnny's preschool class went on a field trip to the fire station. The firefighter giving the presentation held up a smoke detector and asked the class, "Does anyone know what this is?" Little Johnny's hand shot up, and the firefighter called on him. Little Johnny replied, "That's how Mom knows supper is ready." So little Johnny saunters into an ice cream shop decked out in his best cowboy outfit, including 2 guns in a holster. The waitress exclaimed, "Well, aren't you cute? What can I get for you, cowboy?" Little Johnny whips out his guns and says, "Give me an ice cream sundae," and slowly puts the guns back in his holster. Waitress squeals and says, "Chocolate or vanilla?" Johnny pulls out the guns once more. "Give me chocolate." "Whipped cream," says the waitress. "Guns again. Give me whipped cream." "Would you like your nuts crushed?" Out come the guns again, as Johnny growled, "Do you want your tits blown off?" So little, Johnny walks into an ice cream shop, orders 6 large ice cream cones, then sits down and eats them all, one after another. Another customer sees this, goes over to his table and says, "Hey kid, don't you know that eating ice cream like that is bad for your health?" "Yeah, well, my grandfather lived to be 100. Little Johnny replies, "And did he do that by eating 6 large ice cream cones a day?" The man insists. "No," Little Johnny replies. "He did it by minding his own damn business." So the teacher in Johnny's school asked the class what their parents did for a living. One little girl said her father was a doctor. Another said her mother was an engineer. When it was little Johnny's turn, he stood up and said, "My mom's a hooker." Naturally, after that remark, he got sent off to the principal's office. Then, 15 minutes later, he returned. So the teacher asked, "Did you tell the principal what you said in class?" Johnny said, "Yes." "Well, what did the principal say?" "He said that every job is important in our economy, gave me an apple and asked for my mom's number." So the teacher asked her class, "What is the most dangerous snake in the world and why?" Tommy says, "The rattlesnake, miss. Because once it bites you within half an hour, you will die." "Very good," the teacher replied. "Susie suggests the giant anaconda, miss. It wraps its body around you, strangles you, then swallows you whole." "Very good, Susie." Little Johnny stands up saying, "The one-eyed trouser snake, miss. My sister got bitten 6 months ago and is still swelling." So little. Johnny wakes up in the hospital after having his appendix taken out, only to find out he has messed the bed while under anesthesia. Thankfully, no one else was in the room, and he starts worrying people will laugh at him. So he comes up with a plan. He jumps out of bed, takes his soiled bed clothes off, throws them on the bed, wraps the sheets up around everything, opens the window and throws it out. There are 2 guys sitting below his room, having a smoke, and all of a sudden this ball of soiled sheets lands on him. He fights and struggles to get them off himself, and finally throws it all to the ground. His buddy looks over to him and asks what happened. "I'm not sure, man, but I think I just beat the shit out of a ghost." So one day, little Johnny was playing outside and he really had to use the bathroom. At that time, his grandma was getting in the shower as she got undressed. He looked down and said, "What's that?" The grandma replied, "That's my beaver." Little Johnny said, "Okay." The next day, the same thing happened, except this time it was his mom. Little Johnny said, "Mom, I know what that is. It's a beaver." The mom said, "Did Grandma tell you that?" Little Johnny replied, "Yes, but I think Grandma's is dead. Her beaver's tongue is sticking out." So one December day, little Johnny decides to write his Christmas letter to Santa. When all of a sudden, his mom pops into his room. "What are you doing, son?" she asks. "I'm writing my letter to Santa," he says. "With how bad you've been this year, you'll have to write a letter to Jesus to get anything." So Johnny starts to write his letter to Jesus and has to think about what he's going to say. "Dear Jesus, I've been a good boy this year." Nah, he thinks. If Santa knows that's not true, then Jesus will definitely know I'm lying. So he tries again. "Dear Jesus, I've been a somewhat good boy this year." Nope, he thinks to himself. Jesus is probably smart enough to know that's a lie also. So, to clear his mind and think better, Johnny goes for a walk. As he's walking down the street, he spots a nativity scene on someone's front lawn. He goes up to it, steals Mary away from the manger and takes it home. As he sits down, he has the perfect idea of what he's going to write. "Dear Jesus, if you ever want to see your mother again." So there was a little Johnny whose mother was about to have a baby. One day, little Johnny walked in and saw his mother naked. He asked his mother what the hair between her legs was. She responded, "It's my washcloth." Weeks later, after the mother had her baby, little Johnny walked in on his mother again. While she was in the hospital, the doctor had shaved her pubic hair. Little Johnny asked, "What happened to your washcloth?" The mother responded, "I lost it." Little Johnny, trying to be helpful, set out to find his mother's washcloth. A few days later, he ran to his mother yelling and screaming, "I found your washcloth." The mother, thinking that little Johnny was just playing, went along with him and asked, "Where did you find it?" Little Johnny answered, "The maid has it. She is washing Daddy's face with it." So little Johnny was traveling alone for the first time and was excited about the plane ride. As he settled into his seat, he pulled out a book to read during the flight. Just then, a stranger sat down next to him and struck up a conversation. The stranger started by saying, "Hi there, little guy. My name is Bob. What's your name?" "My name is Little Johnny," replied the boy. Bob smiled and said, "Let's talk, little Johnny. I've heard that flights go quicker if you strike up a conversation with your fellow passenger." Little Johnny, intrigued by this idea, closed his book and said, "Okay, what would you like to discuss?" Bob thought for a moment and said, "How about nuclear power? It's a fascinating subject." Little Johnny thought for a moment and then said, "That could be an interesting topic, but let me ask you a question first." "Sure," said Bob, eager to hear what little Johnny had to say. "A horse, a cow, and a deer all eat grass. The same stuff. Yet a deer excretes little pellets, while a cow turns out a flat patty and a horse produces clumps of dried grass. Why do you suppose that is?" Bob was taken aback by the question and said, "Geez, I have no idea." Little Johnny smiled and said, "Well then, how is it that you feel qualified to discuss nuclear power when you don't know shit?" So that little bastard little Johnny was passing his parents' bedroom in the middle of the night in search of a glass of water. Hearing a lot of moaning and thumping, he peeks in and catches his parents in the act. Before his dad can even react, little Johnny exclaims, "Oh boy, horsey ride. Daddy, can I ride on your back?" Daddy, relieved that Johnny was not asking more uncomfortable questions and seeing the opportunity not to break his stride, agrees. Johnny hops on, and Daddy starts going to town. Pretty soon, his mom starts moaning and gasping, and Johnny cries out, "Hang on tight, Daddy." This is the part where me and the milkman usually gets bucked off. So little Johnny and his dad walk into a bank. When they get in line, little Johnny notices the very large woman in front of them. Little Johnny tugs at his dad's jacket and says, "Daddy, look, that lady is huge." The father replies, "Yes, son, she's as big as a truck." About a minute later, the large woman's beeper goes off, and little Johnny pushes his father out of the way and yells, "Look out, Dad!" It's backing up. So little Johnny was always curious about the world around him and loved to ask questions. One day, his friends told him that adults have a deep, dark secret and can be easily manipulated. Johnny was intrigued by this information and decided to put it to the test. He went home and approached his mother, saying, "Mom, I know everything." His mother, surprised, hushed him and gave him $10, saying, "Just don't tell Dad." Feeling confident, Johnny decided to test his newfound knowledge on his father. He approached him and said, "Dad, I know everything." His father, impressed, gave him $100 and said, "Don't tell Mom." Just then, the mailman knocked on the door. Johnny answered it and said, "I know everything, mister." The mailman drops all his mail. His eyes tear up and he says, "Well, then Johnny, come give Daddy a hug." So a teacher asks her students to share what their dads do for a living. Little Mary says, "My dad's a lawyer. He helps put bad guys in jail." Little Jack says, "My dad's a doctor. He makes sick people feel better." The class goes around, and everyone has their turn except little Johnny. The teacher gently asks, "Johnny, what does your dad do?" Johnny replies, "My dad is dead." The teacher, taken aback, says, "Oh, Johnny, I'm so sorry. But what did he do before he passed away?" Johnny thinks for a second and says, "He turned blue and shit on the carpet." So a teacher says to little Johnny, "If I gave you 2 cats and another 2 cats and another 2, how many cats would you have?" Johnny says, 7. Teacher says, "No, listen carefully. If I gave you 2 cats and another 2 cats and another 2, how many would you have?" Johnny again says, 7. Teacher says, "Let me put it to you differently. If I gave you 2 apples and another 2 apples and another 2, how many would you have?" Johnny says, 6. Teacher says, "Good. Now, if I gave you 2 cats and another 2 cats and another 2, how many would you have?" Johnny says, 7. Teacher says, "Johnny, why do you keep saying 7? Johnny says, "Because I already have a damn cat." So little Johnny was visiting a friend of his in New York during the winter. He and his friend went outside to play in the snow. After about an hour, his friend's mother called them back inside and had them remove their wellies and gloves. Johnny's friend's mom was a tall, voluptuous woman who would warm her son's hands by putting them between her thighs. So as usual, when her son came in from playing in the snow, she asked if his hands were cold, to which he replied yes. She then put them together and stuck them between her warm thighs. After a few minutes, she asked, "Are they warm yet?" And the little boy said yes. Johnny watched his friend, and waited for his turn. His friend's mom then asked him if his hands were cold, to which he replied, yes. So she took his hands, put them together, and stuck them between her thighs. After a few minutes, she asked if his hands were warm yet, and he said yes. So she took them out. Johnny continued to stand there with a sly grin on his face. When his friend's mom asked, "Well, what is it now, Johnny? What's wrong?" Johnny looked up at her and replied, "My ears are cold too." So little Johnny sees his dad's car passing the playground and going into the woods. Curious, he follows the car and sees his dad and Aunt Jane kissing. Johnny finds this so exciting and can barely contain himself. After watching for some time, he runs home and tells his mother excitedly, Mommy, I was at the playground and I saw Daddy kissing Aunt Jane." "Slow down, honey," his mom interrupts. "I want to hear the whole story." "Okay. I was at the playground and I saw Daddy's car go into the woods with Aunt Jane. I went to look and I saw Daddy giving Aunt Jane a big kiss. Then he helped her take off her shirt. Then Aunt Jane helped Daddy take his pants off. Then Aunt Jane laid down on the seat. Then Daddy." At this point, his mom cuts him off and says, "Johnny, this is such an interesting story, but you should save the rest for dinner, because I want to see the look on Daddy's face when you tell him tonight." Later that night, Johnny and his parents are sitting at the dinner table, and Johnny's mom asks him to tell the story. He describes the car going into the woods, the undressing, and laying down on the seat. He continues, "Then Daddy and Aunt Jane did the same thing that Mommy and Uncle Jeff used to do when Daddy was in the army." So little Johnny once bought his grandma a very nice, luxurious toilet brush for her birthday. But when he went to visit her a couple of weeks later, it wasn't in the bathroom. Little Johnny asked his grandma, "Gran, what happened to the toilet brush I gave you?" "Darling, I'm sorry, but I just didn't like it. After all those years, I've gotten used to the toilet paper, and this new thing was just too scratchy." So little Johnny is sitting in class one day when the teacher says, "I'm going to give you a letter of the alphabet, and you need to give me a word that starts with that letter and use it in a sentence." "Okay, let's start with a..." Little Johnny raises his hand and shouts, "Teacher! Pick me, pick me." The teacher thinks to herself, "I know what he's going to say." So she calls on another student. Next, the teacher asks for the letters B, C, and D. And each time little Johnny raises his hand, the teacher ignores him and calls on other students. This continues until she reaches the letter U. By this time, little Johnny is almost jumping out of his seat. The teacher can't really think of a bad word that starts with that letter. So she calls on him. "Urinate," yells little Johnny. The teacher rolls her eyes and says, "Okay, now use it in a sentence." Little Johnny responds, "Urinate, but if you had bigger breasts, you would be a 10. So one day, the teacher decided to have a discussion with her class. She asked, "Can anyone tell me when girls grow up?" Little Johnny shot his hand up immediately. "When they start wearing bra," he declared confidently. Amused, but trying to stay composed, she decided to keep the discussion going. "All right, Johnny," she said with a smirk. "And when do boys grow up?" Without missing a beat, Johnny leaned back in his chair, still grinning, and replied, "When they figure out what the bras are for." So one night, little Johnny was really scared sleeping by himself at camp. So he sprints out of his tent and runs to his teacher's tent and asks, "Miss, "Can I please sleep with you tonight?" His teacher replies, "No." Johnny moans and says, "But my mom lets me." "Okay then, just for tonight," the teacher replies. Johnny jumps into bed with her and asks, "Miss, can I please play with your belly button with my finger?" She again says, "No." "But my mom lets me," says Johnny again. "Well, I suppose it's okay," replies the teacher. Things are silent for a few minutes until the teacher leaps up screaming, "That's not my belly button." Little Johnny replies, "It ain't my finger either." So 3 boys were bragging about how great their dads were. Little Toby said, "My dad's the fastest. He can fire an arrow and start running. I swear, he gets there before the arrow does." Little Jimmy chimed in, "That's nothing. My dad's a hunter. He can shoot his gun and beat the bullet to the target." Little Johnny shook his head and smirked. "You guys have no idea what fast is. My dad's a civil servant. He clocks out at 4:30, but somehow manages to be home by 3:45. So in a classroom full of curious students, the teacher stood at the front and posed the age-old question. "Class," she said with a smile, "what do you want to be when you grow up?" Eager hands shot into the air, and the teacher pointed to one of the most enthusiastic students, little Johnny. Johnny stood up confidently and declared, "I want to be a billionaire." The other students leaned in, intrigued. "I'll go to the fanciest clubs," Johnny continued. "Take the most beautiful girl with me. Buy her a Ferrari worth millions. Give her an apartment in Hawaii, a mansion in Paris, a private jet for traveling Europe, an unlimited credit card, and well spoil her every day." The classroom fell silent as the teacher's jaw nearly hit the floor. After a moment, trying to regain her composure, the teacher quickly turned to another student. "And what about you, Susie? What do you want to be when you grow up?" Without hesitation, Susie grinned and said, "I want to be Johnny's girl." So little Johnny's teacher had a tradition. Every Friday, she asked the class a tough question. Anyone who answered correctly wouldn't have to come to school on Monday. "The first Friday?" she asked. "How many gallons of water are there in the entire world?" Nobody knew, so they all had to come to school on Monday. "The next Friday?" she asked. "How many grains of sand are there on all the beaches in the world?" Again, no one had an answer, so Monday school it was. By now, little Johnny was fed up with these impossible questions. Determined to outsmart his teacher, he painted 2 ping-pong balls black. The following Friday, just before the teacher asked her question, Johnny rolled the 2 black ping-pong balls down the aisle toward her. Surprised, she asked, "All right, who's the comedian with 2 black balls?" Johnny stood up and grinned. "Bill Cosby. See you on Tuesday." So a nun was teaching Sunday school one morning and asked her class, "When you die and go to heaven, which part of your body do you think goes first?" Susie eagerly raised her hand. "I think it's your hands," she said. The nun smiled. "Why do you think that, Susie?" Susie replied, "Because when you pray, you hold your hands together and God takes your hands first." The nun nodded approvingly. "What a lovely answer, Susie." Then little Johnny raised his hand. "Sister, I think it's your legs." The nun furrowed her brow. "Your legs? Why would you say that, Johnny?" Little Johnny shrugged and said, "Well, I walked past my parents' bedroom last night. Mommy had her legs straight up in the air, yelling, 'Oh God, I'm coming!' If Dad hadn't been holding her down, I think we'd have lost her." The nun fainted. So little Johnny visits his grandfather to ask about his experiences in the war for a school history project. After 10 minutes, he notices Johnny is getting bored, so he decides to spice things up by saying, "If you promise not to tell your grandmother and keep quiet, I'll show you a bullet." "Wow," says Johnny, "you've got a real bullet?" Granddad shows him the bullet, and after carefully examining it, Johnny turns to the old man and asks, "Do you have any other memorabilia?" Granddad smiles and tells him, "I've got a revolver." "A revolver?" Johnny starts to exclaim, but Granddad quickly interrupts. "Keep quiet, Johnny. Don't let your grandmother hear." "Sorry, Granddad," Johnny replies. "I was excited. Where do you keep the revolver?" "In my old artillery box with the grenades," Granddad says. "Grenades?" Johnny squeals, but the old man quickly warns him, "Quiet, lad. Your grandmother won't be happy about me showing you weapons." "Can I see the grenades?" Johnny asks. "Yes," answers the old chap, pleased to have his grandson so interested, but still wary of his wife. "I suppose you'll want to see the rifle, too." "A rifle?" Johnny breathes. "Oh, Granddad, where is the rifle?" "With the machine gun," the old man confesses. "A machine gun, Granddad?" Johnny says, in disbelief. "Where's the machine gun?" The old man looks up and replies, "In the loft behind the tank." So little Johnny was starting his first day at a new school, and his father called the teacher to tell her that little Johnny was a big gambler. She said that it was no problem, and she has seen worse than that. After little Johnny's first day at his new school, his father called the teacher to see how it went. She said, "I think I broke his gambling." The father asked how, and she said, "He bet me $5 that I had a mole on my butt. So I pulled down my pants and won his money." "Damn," said the father. "What's wrong?" the teacher asked. Little Johnny's father said, "This morning he bet me $100 he would see his teacher's butt before the day was over." So little Johnny is in school one day when his teacher tells the class that she wants to hear each of them say a little about their families, and specifically what is needed in their lives. The first student is a little girl. She stands up and says, "My family is mostly happy, but what we really need is a bit more money. My dad leaves for work before I'm even awake, and he works hard until late at night to put food on the table. Money is needed in my family. More time with my dad is needed." The teacher is moved. She thanks the student and moves on to the next. A little boy stands up and says, "All we are missing in my family is my older brother. He went off to fight in the war a year ago, and nobody has heard from him since. My mom always waits for him by the window. My brother is desperately needed back in our family." The teacher is now tearing up. She thanks the little boy and moves on to the next student, eventually making their way around the classroom with one heartfelt response after another. Finally, they come to the last student, little Johnny. The teacher has come to expect antics from him, but gives him a chance. "Little Johnny, what about you? What is something needed by your family?" Little Johnny stands up briefly and says nothing. "We have everything," and sits back down. The teacher, slightly upset, asks now, "How is that possible? Each of your classmates have shared something. How can you be so sure that your family doesn't need a thing?" Little Johnny stands back up and says, "Well, I was watching TV with my parents late last night when my sister came home crying. She said, 'Dad, please don't be mad at me, but I am pregnant.' My dad disappointingly slapped his knee and said, 'Damn it. That's all we needed. So little, Johnny walked into confessional booth. "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned," he said. "I've been with a loose girl." The priest, with a raised eyebrow, asked, "Is that you, little Johnny?" "Yeah, Father," Johnny confessed, sounding pretty bummed out. The priest leaned in, his voice a mix of concern and curiosity. "Who was this girl you were with?" Johnny hesitated, caught between doing the right thing and keeping his word. "I can't tell you, Father. I don't want to mess up her rep." The priest nodded, getting where Johnny was coming from. "I'll probably find out who it is eventually, so might as well spill now." "Was it Tina Manetti?" Johnny shook his head. "No way." The priest kept going, throwing out names, but Johnny was a brick wall. "Nancy Connor?" "I'll never tell," Johnny insisted. "Judy Cohen?" Johnny, unyielding, said, "I'm sorry, but I can't rat her out." The priest, now kind of impressed by Johnny's loyalty, tried another name. "Kate Takenyo?" With a cheeky grin, Johnny replied, "My lips are sealed." "Was it Rose DeMarco?" the priest asked, almost out of names. "Please, Father, I can't say." Johnny stood firm. The priest sighed, a mix of frustration and admiration. "You're pretty tight-lipped, and I respect that. But you've sinned, and there's gotta be some penance. No altar boy duties for you for 4 months. Now go and straighten up." Johnny walked out of the confessional and plopped down next to his buddy Franco, who leaned in, whispering, "What did you get?" Johnny flashed a knowing smile. "A 4-month break and 5 solid leads."